The nurse dropped the medication tray with a crash that echoed through the silent hallway of Presbyterian Hospital. "My God, how did you get in here?" The boy froze at the patient's bedside in the presidential suite, his dirty hands still lightly touching the unconscious man's face. He was no more than 12 years old. His clothes were torn. His bare feet left mud marks on the Italian marble floor. His wide eyes revealed more surprise than fear, as if he himself didn't know how to explain how he had gotten there. "Security. Call security now." Nurse Susan Reynolds, 15 years of impeccable profession, had never faced a situation like this. A street urchin invading the private wing of Manhattan's most expensive hospital, touching the face of Richard Hastings, real estate billionaire, VIP patient in a vegetative state for 4 months. But what happened in the next few seconds would defy everything medicine could explain. A tear ran down Richard Hastings' face. A single tear slowly running down the skin of a man declared neurologically incapable of any emotional response. "That's impossible." Susan approached tremblingly, momentarily forgetting the intruder. People in a deep vegetative coma do not produce emotional tears. She had studied it, seen dozens of cases. That simply didn't happen. The Filipino boy didn't try to escape. He remained there, his small hands still close to the billionaire's face, as if he were trapped by some invisible force. "Sorry, ma'am," he murmured in heavily accented English. I know him." The absurd phrase echoed in the luxurious suite. A Filipino street urchin claiming to know Richard Hastings III, heir to a fortune valued at $8 billion. A man who circulated exclusively among Manhattan's elite, whose last social event was a charity dinner with a ticket price of $50,000. "You don't know this man," Susan responded automatically, but her voice trailed off as she noticed something more disturbing. Richard's right hand had moved. Just a slight tremor in the fingers, but she was absolutely sure. That hand was in a different position. Dr. James Morrison rushed into the suite, alerted by the emergency alarm. Renowned neurosurgeon, 40 years into his career, he stopped abruptly as he processed the bizarre scene. A dirty boy next to the bed, a pale nurse pointing at the patient, and Richard Hastings with his face slightly turned towards the boy. "Does anyone want to explain to me what the hell is going on here?" "Doctor, Mr. Hastings reacted. I saw it with my own eyes. Tears, movement in his hand, his head. People in a vegetative state don't react emotionally, Susan. You know that." But Dr. Morrison approached with the neurological flashlight, examining the patient's pupils. Nothing. Reflections absent as always. But something bothered him. The position of the head actually looked different from the daily photographic records. "Security on the way, doctor," Susan informed over the intercom. "Wait." Dr. Morrison raised his hand, watching the Filipino boy with piqued scientific curiosity. "Kid, you said you know Mr. Hastings. How?" The boy swallowed hard, his black eyes shining with something between fear and determination. "On the streets, sir, near his building. He fed me, every day for 2 years, before he got sick." The silence that followed was thick as concrete. Richard Hastings, publicly known for his ruthless business coldness, for lawsuits against small business owners, for controversial statements about bums who choose to live on the streets, secretly feeding a Filipino child. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Morrison began, but was interrupted by the arrival of 2 burly security guards. "We want this invader arrested," ordered an icy female voice from the door. Victoria Hastings, 38, Richard's wife of 10 years, entered the suite with the commanding presence of someone born to command. His Chanel suit contrasted brutally with the boy's torn clothes. "Mrs. Hastings," Dr. Morrison began carefully, "there was an unusual reaction from your husband when this boy— I don't care if my husband levitated out of bed, doctor. This kid invaded private property and probably came to steal." Victoria pointed at the boy with barely concealed disgust. "Get him out of here before I call my lawyer and sue this hospital for gross negligence." "Please, ma'am," the boy begged, tears now streaming down his dirty face. "I didn't come to steal. I just wanted to see if he was okay. He helped me. He was my friend." Victoria let out a laugh so cold it made Susan shiver. "Friend? My husband doesn't have any Filipino street urchin friends, creature. He would barely touch poor people without gloves." He turned to the security guards. "Remove this rubbish immediately." But when the security guard he reached out to grab the boy's arm. Something extraordinary happened. Richard's heart monitoring machine started beeping faster. His blood pressure rose noticeably on the monitor, and his hand, that same right hand, slowly clenched into a fist. Dr. Morrison pushed the security guard back, eyes fixed on the machines. "No one touches this kid. No one. How dare you give orders in the presence of my— Your husband is reacting, Victoria," Dr. Morrison almost screamed. "For the first time in 4 months, we are seeing responsive neurological activity, and it is directly related to the presence of this boy." Victoria paled but quickly regained her mask of control. "Coincidence?" Involuntary muscle spasms. You said it yourself that people in a vegetative state. I know what I said. The doctor examined the graphs on the monitors, his trained mind recognizing impossible patterns. But this is different. The Filipino boy, taking advantage of the distraction, approached the bed again. He gently touched Richard's closed hand, and everyone in the room watched with their mouths open as the billionaire's fingers slowly opened, as if responding to the touch. "Uncle Richard," the boy whispered, using the Filipino term of respect. "It's me, Miguel. Haven't you forgotten me?" And then something happened that would make that ordinary Monday turn into the beginning of a revelation that would destroy reputations, expose decade-old secrets, and prove that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped up in the most unlikely of ways. Richard Hastings's eyes moved beneath closed lids. Dr. Morrison rushed over to examine him closely, hands shaking for the first time in 30 years of medical practice. REM movement. Good heavens, he's trying to wake up. Victoria Hastings took a step back, her perfectly made-up face showing for the first time genuine emotion, pure fear. This can't be happening, but it was. And at that moment, as the Filipino street boy held the comatose billionaire's hand, and tears streamed down both their faces, no one in the room could imagine the size of the storm that was about to crash into the lives of everyone involved. Because sometimes the biggest threat to powerful people doesn't come from billionaire rivals or corporate scandals. It comes from a 12-year-old child who knows truths that should have remained buried forever. If this impossible story has already moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what you just saw was just the first piece of a puzzle that involves family secrets, hidden fortunes, and a connection between two worlds that should never have crossed. And the question no one yet had the courage to ask was the scariest of all. What exactly was Richard Hastings doing on the streets feeding a Filipino boy every day for 2 years? News of the medical miracle at Presbyterian Hospital spread like wildfire. Not by the newspapers, Victoria Hastings made sure no reporters came near the presidential suite. But among nurses, resident doctors, and cleaning staff, the story of the Filipino boy who made a comatose billionaire react became an instant urban legend. Miguel Rodriguez, 12, born in Manila, and brought illegally to the United States at age 7 by traffickers who promised his parents a better life, now found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was not arrested. Dr. Morrison had prevented that. But he wasn't allowed back into Richard Hastings' room either. "You need to understand the gravity of the situation," Dr. Morrison explained to the boy in the hospital hallway 3 days after the incident. "Ms. Hastings has obtained a court order preventing you from approaching. If you attempt to enter again, you will be detained immediately." Miguel nodded, but his eyes revealed a determination that contrasted with his fragile appearance. "He'll wake up, doctor. I know he will." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I promised I would come back." The simple answer carried a weight that the doctor couldn't fully comprehend. Meanwhile, inside the presidential suite, Victoria Hastings was conducting her own investigation. Sitting next to her unconscious husband's bed, she typed furiously on her laptop, combing through bank statements from the past 5 years. "That's impossible," she muttered to herself, watching monthly transfers of $2,000 to an account she had never seen, always on the 15th, always for the same price, for 27 consecutive months. Until the month of Richard's accident. The account belonged to a Rosa Rodriguez, and the registered address was in Elmhurst, Queens, one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. Victoria picked up the phone and called Marcus Webb, the private investigator the Hastings family had had on the payroll for years. "Marcus, I need information about someone. Urgent." 6 hours later, she had a complete dossier in her hands. Rosa Rodriguez, 34, Filipina, worked 16 hours a day as a cleaner in 3 different jobs. Single mother of Miguel Rodriguez. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment shared with 2 other immigrant families. Legal status, undefined, probably undocumented. But the detail that made Victoria squeeze the report hard enough to crumple the pages was highlighted in yellow. Rosa had worked as a night cleaner at the Hastings Tower office building for 4 years. His shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 5 a.m. "So it was like this," Victoria whispered, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in a way she definitely didn't like. "Your husband, leaving early in the morning for important meetings, or to check on projects, was actually—" The phone rang, interrupting his venomous thoughts. It was his brother-in-law, James Hastings, Richard's younger brother and vice president of Hastings Enterprises. "Victoria, we need to talk about the legal situation." His voice was too professional, too cold. "With Richard in a vegetative state, shareholders are nervous. We need someone with full power of attorney to make decisions." "I already have legal power of attorney, James. Power of attorney for medical decisions, yes. But for business," he paused calculatedly. Well, Richard never gave you full access to the company's operations, did he? And now we're losing contracts. Investors are questioning the leadership. Victoria felt the trap closing. James was always ambitious. He always lived in his older brother's shadow. A permanently disabled Richard was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. The family's lawyers are already preparing the documents, James continued. Considering that Richard has no children and that you and he, well, you've lived quite separate lives over the past few years, I believe the council will agree to me taking over temporarily. Temporarily. Victoria repeated the word as if it were poison. Until Richard wakes up, of course. The barely concealed sarcasm was unbearable. They both knew that the chance of recovery was statistically close to zero. After hanging up, Victoria turned her gaze to her unconscious husband. 10 years of marriage. A prenuptial contract that would leave her with just $50 million if they divorced. A ridiculous amount compared to the Hastings Empire's $8 billion. But if Richard died while they were still married, she would inherit 40% of everything. Unless James could prove that she was not a devout wife under the terms of Richard's will. And now there was this Filipino boy claiming to be her husband's friend, a boy whose mother received $2,000 a month from a secret account, a boy who, inexplicably, had provoked Richard's first neurological reaction in 4 months. Victoria didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in secrets, and secrets, when exposed at the wrong time, could destroy fortunes. While Victoria plotted in the hospital, Miguel returned to the temporary shelter where social services had placed him after discovering he was living on the streets. His mother, Rosa, worked so much she barely saw him, and their overcrowded Queens apartment had no real room for a child. "How is the rich man?" asked Tommy, another boy from the shelter, with the casual cruelty of someone who never had anything to lose. "Still thinking you're friends?" Miguel didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out a small object from inside his worn shirt, a silver keychain with the initials RH engraved on it. Richard had given it to him 6 months earlier, saying, "Keep this, Miguel. One day you'll understand why it's important." At the time, Miguel thought it was just a nice gift. But now, turning the keychain in the dim light of the shelter, he noticed something he had never noticed before. The back opened, and inside was a small USB memory chip. His hands shook as he realized what this could mean. That same night, Dr. Morrison was in his office reviewing Richard's neurological exams for the 10th time, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Doctor, there's a woman here wanting to speak to you. She says it's urgent about patient Hastings." Rosa Rodriguez entered the office with the posture of someone carrying the world on her shoulders. Her eyes were red from crying, and her cleaning lady's hands, calloused, wrinkled from excessive use of cleaning products, were visibly shaking. "Doctor, I know I have no right to ask for anything," she began in heavily accented English. "But my son, he's not crazy." Mr. Richard really knew him. He knew him very well. Dr. Morrison gestured for her to sit. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I believe you. I saw Mr. Hastings' reactions with my own eyes. But I need to understand, how exactly did your son meet one of the richest men in Manhattan?" Rosa took a deep breath, as if she was about to reveal a secret she had kept for years. "I've worked in his building for 4 years. Night shift. Mr. Richard, he always stayed late in the office. Alone, mostly. And he saw me. He really saw me, you know? Not like the other executives who look through you like your furniture." Tears started to flow. "One night I was crying in the hallway. I had just received news that my mother in the Philippines was very sick. I had no money to send her. There was no way to get back. Mr. Hastings helped her. He paid for my mother's full treatment, surgery, medicine, everything. And when I tried to thank him, cry, get down on my knees, he just said, 'Rosa, you work more in a week than most people I know work in a month. That's not charity. That's justice.'" Dr. Morrison felt a tightness in his chest. This did not fit at all with the public image of Richard Hastings, the businessman known for firing hundreds of employees to increase profits, for suing small traders into bankruptcy. "That's how he met Miguel," Rosa continued. "Sometimes I didn't have anyone to leave my son with. He went to work with me. He sat quietly reading comics while I cleaned. Mr. Richard started talking to him. He discovered that Miguel was very intelligent, loved mathematics, dreamed of studying, and he started giving you money." "It wasn't like that." Rosa shook her head vehemently. "He opened a savings account for Miguel. He said that when he turned 18 he would have money for college, and every month he would come down from the office at 2 a.m., sit on the park bench in front of the building, and spend half an hour talking to my son." The image was surreal. A billionaire sitting on a park bench at 2 in the morning talking to a Filipino street kid while the world slept. "Why so much secrecy?" Dr. Morrison asked. "He said he had enemies. If they found out about us, they would use it against him, or against us." Rosa wiped away her tears. But Miguel loved those meetings. He called Mr. Richard Uncle Rich. They talked about everything: mathematics, stars, history, dreams. And when did he have the stroke? It was terrible. The last thing Mr. Richard said to Miguel was, "No matter what happens, you keep studying. You're special, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Rosa sobbed. 2 weeks later, he was in a coma, and the deposits stopped. Dr. Morrison now understood the boy's devotion. This wasn't about a billionaire doing charity. It was about a lonely man who found genuine purpose in helping a child dream of a better future. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what are you not telling me?" Rosa hesitated, then whispered, "His wife. She called me today. She offered $100,000 if I took Miguel and disappeared. She said if I didn't accept, she would report me to immigration. I have 2 weeks to decide." The silence in the office was thick as concrete. Victoria Hastings was playing a dangerous game. Eliminate the inconvenient witnesses to Richard's secret life, protect the inheritance, keep the public image intact. But what none of them knew yet, not Victoria with all her paranoia, not James with his ambition, not even Dr. Morrison with his medical compassion, was that Miguel had found the USB chip. And in that little memory device was engraved a truth that not only explained why Richard Hastings had risked everything to help a Filipino family, it was a truth that, when revealed, would destroy reputations built over decades, expose crimes that Manhattan's elite had buried for generations, and prove that sometimes the biggest secrets aren't locked in bank vaults, but in the hands of a 12-year-old who just wants his friend to wake up. Because Richard Hastings wasn't feeding a Filipino boy out of random kindness. He was protecting a truth that, if discovered, would change everything. And while Victoria was planning how to eliminate the problem called Miguel Rodriguez, the boy held in his hands the only device capable of transforming his apparent vulnerability into the most powerful weapon any billionaire in a coma could have left behind. The question that no one yet had the courage to ask was the most dangerous of all. What exactly had Richard Hastings recorded on that chip before falling into a coma? And why did he trust this explosive secret to a child the entire world underestimated? Miguel Rodriguez spent 3 nights in a row trying to access the contents of the USB chip that Richard had hidden on his keychain. The shelter's old computer crashed with every attempt, and the boy didn't have enough technical knowledge to get past the password protection. "I need help," he muttered to himself on the 4th night, watching the small device glow in the dim light of their shared bedroom. Tommy and the other boys slept soundly, oblivious to the treasure that Miguel held in his hands. The answer came from an unexpected place. The next morning, while Miguel was waiting for the school bus that would take him to the public school where he was temporarily enrolled, a black Mercedes stopped next to the bus stop. The window rolled down, revealing Dr. Morrison. "Come in, Miguel. We need to talk." The boy hesitated just a second before obeying. The doctor drove in silence until he parked at an inconspicuous cafe 3 blocks away. "Your mother came to me," Dr. Morrison began as they sat at a table in the back. "Told you about Victoria Hastings' offer. $100,000 to disappear." Miguel looked down at the cup of hot chocolate the doctor had ordered for him. "My mother will accept it. She's afraid of immigration. She's afraid of losing me. What about you? Are you afraid?" "I'm afraid Uncle Richard will wake up and I won't be there." The boy's voice shook. "I'm afraid he'll think I abandoned him, like everyone else did." Dr. Morrison studied the boy's thin face, seeing a determination in it that contrasted dramatically with his vulnerable appearance. "You hid something from me when we met in the hallway. Something important. It wasn't a question. It was a calculated statement from someone who had spent decades reading people." Miguel bit his lower lip, then made a decision that would change everything. He pulled the keychain out of his shirt and placed it on the table. "He gave this to me 6 months before he got sick. He told me to keep it, and one day I would understand why." He carefully separated the 2 halves of the keychain, revealing the USB chip. "But it has a password. I can't open it." The doctor took the device reverently, as if holding something infinitely precious and dangerous at the same time. "Do you have any idea what could be here?" "The truth," Miguel responded with devastating simplicity. "Uncle Richard always said that the truth is the only thing the powerful truly fear." Dr. Morrison smiled for the first time in days. "I know someone who can help us. But Miguel, you need to understand, if we open this, if we discover something important, there will be no going back. Victoria Hastings is not a woman who forgives threats. She already wants us to disappear." The boy shrugged his shoulders with the pragmatism of someone who lived on the streets. "At least this way we find out why she's so afraid." 2 hours later, they were in the tiny apartment of David Chen, a former hacker who now worked as a digital forensics specialist for law firms. Dr. Morrison had known him since his college days, when David was still deciding whether to use his technological talents for good or quick profit. "Military protection," David hissed as he plugged the chip into his modified computer. "Whoever encrypted this wasn't kidding. It'll take a few hours." As complex programs ran on the screen, filling it with incomprehensible codes, Dr. Morrison received a call from the hospital. It was Susan, the nurse, whispering urgently, "Doctor, Victoria Hastings has brought in a new medical team. They say they are coma specialists from another institution, but something is wrong. They want to change Richard's medication protocol. What kind of change? Stronger sedatives. They said it's to stabilize the patient, but doctor, people in a deep vegetative coma don't need sedatives. Unless they're starting to wake up, Dr. Morrison added, feeling a surge of anger. Victoria was trying to prevent Richard from regaining consciousness. Susan, can you delay this? Come up with some bureaucratic complication? I can try, but not for long. When he hung up, Miguel was watching him with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. She's going to kill him, isn't she? His wife. Not kill, but keep him in a coma permanently? That she will try. The doctor looked at David. How much longer? 2 hours, maybe 3. Miguel stood up abruptly. We don't have 3 hours. I need to see him. Now. You have a court order preventing. I woke him up once, I can do it again. The certainty in the boy's voice was unshakable. Before she makes him sleep forever, Dr. Morrison made a decision that could cost him his medical license. Come on, but we need to be quick and smart. The plan was extremely risky. Dr. Morrison would normally enter through the main hall, distracting the team and Victoria with technical questions about the new protocols. Miguel would enter through the service staircase, the same one he had used the first time, when no one knew how a street child had gotten to the presidential suite. 15 minutes, Dr. Morrison instructed as they parked 2 blocks from the Presbyterian Hospital. That's all I can give you before security notices. Miguel nodded and disappeared towards the service entrance with the agility of someone who had spent years navigating the forgotten corners of the city. Inside the presidential suite, Victoria Hastings personally supervised as Dr. Edmund Carlisle, a neurologist she had hired specifically because he asked minimal questions when the pay was generous, prepared the new medication. How long until we can declare the prognosis officially irreversible? Victoria asked with the subtlety of a blade. With this protocol? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Dr. Carlisle adjusted the IV drip. The sedatives will keep any residual brain activity completely suppressed. For all legal purposes, your husband will be. The suite door opened violently. Sorry to interrupt. Dr. Morrison entered with impeccable medical authority. But as the neurosurgeon responsible for this patient, I need to personally review any changes in treatment protocol. It's hospital policy. I'm sure Dr. Carlisle understands. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, acknowledging the obstacle. Dr. Morrison, what a surprise. I thought you were off today. Last-minute change. He approached the infusion pump, inspecting the medications with exaggerated care. Interesting. Midazolam in doses that I would consider unusual for a patient in this condition. As the 3 adults engaged in a tense technical discussion, no one noticed the small figure slipping through the bathroom door adjacent to the suite, a service entrance that housekeeping staff used. Miguel moved silently to the bed, his heart hammering at the sight of Richard again. The billionaire seemed smaller, more fragile than the boy remembered. The surrounding machines beeped monotonously, measuring a life suspended between existing and disappearing. Uncle Rich, Miguel whispered, his small hands gently touching the man's face. It's me. I'm back, like I promised. Nothing happened. Miguel felt despair rising. 15 minutes. He only had 15 minutes before Dr. Morrison's plan fell apart, and security yanked him out of there permanently. Please, his voice broke. You said I was special, that I wouldn't let anyone convince me otherwise. But now I need you to wake up, Uncle Rich. I need you to be strong like you taught me to be. The voices in the next room grew louder. Victoria had noticed Dr. Morrison's ploy and demanded that he leave immediately. Miguel closed his eyes and did the only thing he could think of. He began reciting the mathematical equations Richard had taught him during those secret 2 a.m. meetings. Fibonacci sequences, prime numbers, patterns that the billionaire said governed the universe. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The child's voice floated low and rhythmic, like a prayer, and then so subtle that Miguel almost missed it. Richard's fingers twitched. 17, 19, 23, 29, 31. Miguel continued, now holding the man's hand, feeling his fingers squeeze his with increasing strength. The door opened abruptly. Victoria Hastings stormed in, 2 security guards behind her. I knew it. I knew you were distracting. She froze. Richard Hastings had his eyes open, not fully conscious, not yet fully present, but definitely, unquestionably, awake. His eyes moved slowly, focusing with difficulty until they found the face of the Filipino boy beside him. Dr. Morrison pushed his way past the transfixed security guards, his medical training taking over. No one touches him. Susan, call the full neurological team now. Victoria was pale as a sheet. That's impossible. 37, 41, 43, 47. Miguel continued reciting and Richard's eyes moved to the sound, recognition slowly lighting up his devastated face. Doctor, Carlyle, the hired neurologist, watched the scene with professional horror. He was not corrupt enough to deny what he was witnessing, a neurologically impossible recovery happening before his eyes. "Ms. Hastings," he said carefully, "I think we need to completely reconsider the treatment protocol." Victoria knew she had lost, at least temporarily. His attempt to permanently sedate Richard had been thwarted minutes before his execution. And now, with medical witnesses documenting an active awakening, any suspicious action would be ruthlessly investigated. But as she watched the Filipino boy hold her husband's hand and cry tears of pure joy, Victoria made a decision. If he couldn't keep Richard asleep, he needed to eliminate the only real threat to his control of the Hastings fortune, the boy, and any secrets he might have, are protecting. 2 hours later, as the medical team celebrated the first documented case of recovery from a deep vegetative coma induced by pure emotional stimulation, David Chen sent a message to Dr. Morrison. "I did it. You won't believe what's on this chip. We need to meet, now, and get a lawyer, a very good one." Because what Richard Hastings had recorded on that device before his stroke wasn't just evidence of his secret generosity to a Filipino family. It was documented proof, with audio recordings, tracked financial transactions, encrypted emails, and video testimony of a corruption scheme that involved Victoria's own James Hastings and 3 state senators in a plan to manipulate the Manhattan real estate market through the forced displacement of poor communities. Richard had discovered the conspiracy 6 months before his stroke, and when he realized that his own family was willing to destroy thousands of lives for profit, he began secretly compiling evidence. But he knew that if the wrong people found out what he was doing, his life would be in danger. So he entrusted the only copy of that evidence to the one person in his life who he knew to be completely incorruptible, a 12-year-old Filipino boy who still believed the world could be fair. And now, with Richard beginning to awaken and the chip's contents finally accessible, the real battle was about to begin. Because Victoria and James weren't just fighting to keep control of a fortune, they were fighting to avoid federal charges that would put them in prison for the rest of their lives. And the only thing standing between them and freedom was a street urchin they had completely underestimated. Miguel Rodriguez, sitting at the side of the bed as Richard squeezed his hand with increasing strength, had no idea he was holding the key that would not only save his friend, but destroy an empire built on the suffering of others. But he was about to find out. And when he found out, the boy everyone ignored on the streets of Manhattan would become the most dangerous person the city's corrupt elite had ever faced. Because sometimes, the greatest weapon against injustice is not power or money. It's the truth in the hands of someone brave enough to use it. And Miguel Rodriguez was about to learn exactly how much courage he really had. The news exploded like an atomic bomb on the Manhattan political and business scene. Real estate corruption scandal involves Hastings' family and 3 senators. The New York Times headline occupied the entire front page, accompanied by photos of Victoria, James, and the politicians involved. But it wasn't the newspaper that unleashed hell. It was the video. David Chen had worked for 48 hours straight to decrypt and organize the entire contents of the USB chip that Richard had entrusted to Miguel. And when Dr. Morrison saw the completed material, he knew immediately that they needed legal protection before making it public. Eleanor Vance, a federal lawyer specializing in corporate crimes, received the case on a Tuesday night. On Wednesday morning, immunity had already been coordinated for Miguel and Rosa with the FBI. On Thursday at noon, the operation was in place. And on Friday at 6 a.m., simultaneously in 17 different locations, federal agents knocked on doors with search and seizure warrants. Victoria Hastings was sipping her $45 organic coffee when 6 agents entered her $18 million Upper East Side penthouse. "Victoria Hastings, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, bribery of public officials, and attempted murder." Special Agent Thompson read her rights as she was handcuffed, still wearing her Italian silk robe. "This is absurd. My lawyer will—" "Your lawyer is also being arrested right now, Mrs. Hastings, as are your brother-in-law James, Senators Morrison, Blake, and Hutchinson, and 17 other people involved in the scheme." Victoria's face went from outrage to pure panic when Thompson placed a tablet on the table, showing the video that was going viral on the internet at that very moment. It was Richard Hastings, recorded 6 months before his stroke, sitting in his private office at 3 in the morning. "My name is Richard Hastings III. His voice was firm, controlled, but charged with emotion. "And I'm recording this because I discovered that my wife and brother are involved in a criminal scheme that will destroy thousands of poor families for personal profit." Victoria felt her legs weaken. "Over the past 6 months, I have compiled irrefutable evidence," Richard continued in the video. Recordings of conversations where Victoria and James discuss how to bribe senators to pass legislation that will force mass evictions. Trans-bank wires tracking $47 million in bribes. Emails detailing how they plan to use shell companies to buy properties at ridiculously low prices after forcibly displacing families who have lived there for generations. The video then showed documents, transactions, audio recordings, everything meticulously organized, dated, verifiable. But what broke me the most, Richard's voice broke slightly, was finding out that when I confronted Victoria about it, she didn't deny it. She laughed. She said I was getting sentimental and that people like that don't really matter. Victoria closed her eyes, remembering that conversation perfectly. The arrogance with which he had dismissed Richard's concerns, how he had completely underestimated the possibility of him acting against his own family. So I'm doing something I never thought I'd do, Richard concluded the video. I'm entrusting the only copy of this evidence to someone I know to be incorruptible, someone who still believes in real justice. If you're seeing this, it means something happened to me, and it means this person had the courage to bring the truth to light. The screen went dark, and then a second part of the video appeared, recorded more recently. It was Miguel Rodriguez, sitting next to Dr. Morrison and Eleanor Vance, his childish voice contrasting brutally with the seriousness of what he was saying. My name is Miguel Rodriguez. I'm 12 years old. Uncle Richard gave me this chip 6 months before he got sick. He told me that if anything happened to him, I should find someone I trust and give it to him. He told me that there were bad people trying to hurt poor people, and that the truth was the only weapon they were truly afraid of. The boy looked directly at the camera. So here's the truth. What followed was 47 minutes of devastating evidence. Every transaction, every conversation recorded, every incriminating email, all presented with surgical clarity by Eleanor Vance, with technical commentary from digital forensic experts confirming the authenticity of each document. In his temporary cell at the federal station, James Hastings watched the same video on a tablet that the lawyer on duty had brought. His face was gray as concrete. How long? He asked, voice breaking. With the evidence they have, 20 to 30 years minimum. Each. The lawyer closed the tablet. James, they have it all. There is no possible defense here. Your own brother has built a case that would be perfect even for an incompetent prosecutor, and the federal attorney who is leading it is anything but incompetent. James buried his face in his hands. All the empire he had coveted for decades, all the careful political maneuvering, all the dirty money, all destroyed by a Filipino street kid holding a USB chip. At Presbyterian Hospital, Richard Hastings watched the chaos unfold on the TV screens that filled his suite. His recovery was considered miraculous by doctors. In just 5 days since waking up, he was able to speak in short sentences, move with assistance, and process complex information. Miguel was sitting next to him, holding his hand. You did right, Richard managed, his voice still weak but clear. Brave, my boy. I was scared, Miguel admitted, tears flowing. I thought maybe you would be mad at me for exposing your family. Richard squeezed the boy's hand with all the strength he could muster. No, family. They, not family. You, family. Dr. Morrison watched from the doorway, admiring the connection between these two. A broken billionaire and a street urchin, united by something stronger than blood or money, united by genuine kindness in a world that rarely recognizes it. The press room at the federal attorney's office was packed when Eleanor Vance made the official announcement. Today, the federal attorney's office formally charges 17 individuals, including members of the Hastings family and 3 state senators, with conspiracy to commit massive real estate fraud, bribery of public officials, and other related crimes. The camera flashes were incessant. The scheme, which had been operating for at least 4 years, sought to forcibly displace approximately 8,000 low-income families from their homes through corrupt legislation, allowing the defendants to purchase the properties at artificially low prices and resell them for profits estimated at $800 million. A shocked murmur ran through the room. But thanks to the extraordinary courage of Richard Hastings, who compiled this evidence at significant personal risk, and the determination of a 12-year-old named Miguel Rodriguez, who brought this evidence to light when his friend was unable to do so, we were able to prevent this crime against thousands of families from coming to fruition. Eleanor paused, letting the impa, the sound of your words, resonate. This serves as a reminder that justice knows no class, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones society most ignores. In the penthouse that Victoria had considered untouchable, federal agents meticulously cataloged every luxury item that would be confiscated as part of asset restitution: the $2 million paintings, the wardrobe with bags that cost more than cars, the jewelry that could feed entire families for years. Everything would be auctioned off. Every penny would go to a compensation fund for families who were nearly displaced. Victoria, now wearing the standard orange federal prison uniform, watched on TV from the detention room as her luxurious life was dismantled piece by piece live on television. As a woman who swore she was above everyone else, the news anchor commented, Victoria Hastings now faces the prospect of spending the next 3 decades behind bars. Prosecutors say the evidence against her is so overwhelming that no plea bargain has been offered. Victoria's cellmate, a woman who had been arrested for stealing food to feed her children, watched the screen with a wry smile. "You're that rich woman, right? The one in the newspapers?" Victoria didn't respond. "Funny how it works, isn't it? I stole $47 worth of food and got 6 months. You stole millions from poor people and you're getting 30 years. The woman lay down on her bed. "I think we finally have justice working properly." That night, Rosa Rodriguez received an unexpected visitor at her cramped Queens apartment. It was Ernesto Molina, Richard's lawyer. "Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Hastings asked me to deliver this personally." He handed over a thick envelope. Inside were legal documents and a handwritten letter from Richard, written with difficulty but legible. "Rose, for 4 years you cleaned my offices while I pretended to work late. In fact, I looked forward to those brief conversations we had in the empty hallways. You saw me as a human being when everyone else only saw dollars or opportunities. Miguel taught me that family is not blood, it's choice." The documents included transfer $15 million to a trust fund in Miguel's name for his education and future. Another $5 million is in your checking account, tax-free, so you never have to work 16-hour days again. This is not charity. It's the least I can do for the family I chose. "With eternal gratitude, Richard." Rosa let the pages fall, sobbing so loudly that she woke Miguel up in the next room. "Mom, what happened? What happened?" She could only hug him, crying on the thin shoulder of the boy who had risked everything to save a friend. We're free, mijo. We're finally free." And while mother and son cried in their arms in that tiny apartment they might soon leave behind, in another corner of Manhattan, a woman who once had everything now had only the walls of a cell and the crushing weight of her own choices. Victoria Hastings had underestimated a Filipino street boy, thinking that power and money would make her untouchable. But he discovered too late that true strength doesn't come from bank accounts or political connections. It comes from the courage of ordinary people who refuse to accept that injustice is the inevitable price of living in an unequal world. And sometimes, that courage comes wrapped up in the fragile body of a 12-year-old who just wants his friend to wake up. Because in the end, it wasn't the billionaire who saved the street child. It was the street kid who saved the billionaire, and thousands of other families in the process. And it proved that when you give the truth to someone brave enough to use it, not all the expensive lawyers in the world can stop justice from finally being served. The question that remained in the air as the dust began to settle on the biggest corruption scandal Manhattan had ever seen was simple but profound. How many other Miguel Rodriguez are there out there, ignored and underestimated, harboring truths that could change the world? And how many powerful people are about to discover that the biggest threat to their empire of lies comes not from billionaire rivals, but from someone they never deigned to look in the eye? 6 months after the scandal that rocked Manhattan, Miguel Rodriguez was sitting in the front row of the Columbia University auditorium. At 13, he wasn't a college student yet, but he was there as a special guest at the lecture, Business Ethics, When Silence Becomes Complicity. The speaker was Richard Hastings. Richard's recovery had been considered miraculous by medical standards, but anyone who knew him before would say that the real miracle was the transformation that happened afterward. The man who woke up from that coma, it was the same one who had entered. "I spent 50 years building an empire," Richard said into the microphone, his voice still slightly hoarse but firm. "I accumulated billions. I won every award the corporate world has to offer, and I was completely alone, surrounded by people who only saw dollars when they looked at me." The audience of 300 business students and business people listened in absolute silence. "Until a 12-year-old Filipino boy living on the streets taught me what true success is. He had nothing, but he gave me something all my money could never buy. Genuine friendship, no interest, no calculation, just pure humanity." Miguel felt his cheeks burn with the attention, but Richard continued. "When I discovered that my own family was willing to destroy 8,000 families for profit, I faced a choice: protect my blood and my fortune, or protect what was right. I chose the latter, and I entrusted the evidence of this corruption to a child the entire world ignored." Richard paused, his eyes meeting Miguel's in the front row. That boy risked everything, his safety, his mother's safety, his future, to bring the truth to light when I couldn't. He had every reason to disappear with the $100,000 my ex-wife offered, but he chose justice over easy money. The room erupted in applause. Meanwhile, In a federal prison 125 miles away, Victoria Hastings watched a live broadcast of the talk on a tablet another inmate had smuggled out. Her orange uniform was rumpled, her once impeccable hair now tied back in a simple ponytail, without the $500 treatments she used to get weekly. "Turn it off," her cellmate grumbled. "It only hurts you." But Victoria couldn't look away. Seeing Richard, her Richard, in front of hundreds of people, being cheered for doing the exact opposite of everything she had planned. The trial had been swift and devastating. With the evidence compiled by Richard, there was no possible defense. Victoria got 28 years. James got 32. The three senators lost terms and got between 15 and 20 years each. The $800 million they planned to profit from the scheme, confiscated and distributed to a public housing fund that would help the very families they tried to displace. 18 months. Victoria muttered to herself, watching Richard smile at Miguel on the screen. 18 months ago I had everything. Now I have this. His cellmate, a woman named Jennifer who was serving time for insurance fraud, shook her head. "You still don't understand, do you? You never really had anything. You only had things. That boy on the screen, he was always richer than you." Victoria closed her eyes, the truth of those words hurting more than any court sentence. Back at Columbia, after the talk, Miguel was surrounded by students wanting to take photos and ask questions. "How did you have the courage to face such powerful people?" asked a girl with a master's degree in law. Miguel thought carefully before responding. "I guess, when you have nothing to lose, you're free in a way that people with a lot can't understand. They're afraid of losing things. I was just afraid of losing my friend." Dr. Morrison, who was there as Richard's guest, smiled proudly. Eleanor Vance, the federal lawyer who had coordinated the entire case, approached Miguel. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you about something." They sat on a bench outside the auditorium, the afternoon sun bathing the historic campus. "Miguel, in recent months I have received dozens of complaints from other families in similar situations. Real estate corruption schemes, forced relocations, corrupt politicians." Eleanor opened a folder. "But most of these families are afraid to report it. Fear of deportation, of retaliation, of not being taken seriously. And you want me to? I want you to be the face of a national protected reporting campaign for vulnerable families. You have proven that even an undocumented child can challenge the most powerful and win. Your story gives hope." Miguel looked at his hands, the same hands that had held that USB chip, shaking with fear but determination. "I'll talk to my mom, but I think Uncle Rich would like me to do that." Rosa Rodriguez, who was now working just 20 hours a week at a job she chose, managing a Filipino community center in Queens, nearly fainted when Miguel told her about the invitation. "Mijo, you're 13 years old. You've faced things that adults have never faced. Are you sure you want to continue exposing yourself like this? Mommy, if we don't do anything, other families will suffer what we almost suffered. Uncle Rich taught me that when you have power, even if it's just power truth, you have a responsibility to use it." Rosa hugged her son, tears flowing. That boy she had raised alone, in overcrowded apartments working impossible shifts, now spoke about social responsibility, with more wisdom than most adults she knew. "Then we do this together," she decided, like we always did. 3 months later, the Truth Without Fear campaign was launched nationally. Miguel appeared on TV shows, gave interviews to newspapers, spoke at universities, always with the same message. If I could stand up to corrupt billionaires at age 12, you can speak out about the injustice you see. You are not alone. Complaints began to arrive in the thousands. In its first year, the campaign exposed 47 corruption schemes similar to the Hastings family. Dozens of corrupt politicians were arrested. Hundreds of families were saved from forced displacement. And it all started with a Filipino boy who refused to accept that his friendship with a comatose billionaire didn't matter. Richard, in turn, liquidated 60% of his business empire. The $4.8 billion was directed to a foundation focused on affordable housing, education for immigrant children, and justice system reform. My parents left me $50 million, Richard explained in an interview with the New York Times. I turned that into $8 billion over 30 years. And I was miserable, surrounded by vipers who just wanted my money. Now I have only $3.2 billion, but I finally have something money can't buy. Real purpose and people who care about me for who I am, not what I have. The reporter asked, "Do you regret exposing your own family?" "I regret waiting so long. I regret turning a blind eye to signs that had been there for years. But exposing them? That was the only truly right thing I've done in decades." James Hastings, serving his sentence in a medium-security federal prison, received news of his brother's transformation from an article another inmate was reading. "Your brother gave almost everything," the man commented. "He became a saint or something." James laughed bitterly. "He was always better than me. That was always the curse. I knew he was better, and I hated it. Now I see that he wasn't better because of talent or luck. He was better because he chose to be. For the first time in years, James wrote a letter to Richard, not apologizing. He knew that some betrayals are too big for easy forgiveness, but recognizing the damage he caused and accepting the consequences of his choices. Richard never responded, but he didn't throw the letter away either. He kept it in a drawer, along with all the letters Miguel sent him telling him about his adventures in the social justice campaign. For Miguel's 14th birthday, Richard hosted a small party at his apartment. Not the $18 million penthouse where Victoria had lived, but a comfortable Brooklyn loft where he now lived. Present were Dr. Morrison and his family, Eleanor Vance, David Chen, the hacker who had decrypted the chip, Rosa Rodriguez, some children from the community center that Rosa managed, and Susan, the nurse who witnessed Miguel's first miracle at the hospital. A toast. Richard raised his glass of soda. He had stopped drinking $300 champagne. He discovered that $2 soda tasted better when shared with real people. To the boy who saved a foolish billionaire from himself, and to the billionaire who believed that a street kid mattered, Miguel replied, making everyone laugh. Susan wiped away a tear. You guys know I should have called security that first day? I could have lost my job, but something told me to leave you two together. Nurse's instinct, Dr. Morrison joked. They always know when something is real medicine, even if it seems impossible. As the party continued, Miguel and Richard stood on the balcony for a moment, watching the lights of Brooklyn. Uncle Rich, can I ask you something? Always. Do you really think it was worth it? Losing your family, half your fortune, your reputation in the corporate world? Richard didn't hesitate for a second. Miguel, I was in a coma, literally dead to the world. And do you know what brought me back? It wasn't the doctors, it wasn't the machines, it was you. It was knowing that someone in this world cared about me not for what I had, but for who I was. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. So yes, it was worth every penny, every fake relationship lost, every corporate title given back, because for the first time in 50 years, I am truly rich. Rich in things that matter. Miguel smiled, that smile that lit up entire rooms. Besides, Richard continued with a mischievous glint in his eye, who needs $8 billion when $3.2 billion is more than enough to guarantee that, and a brilliant Filipino boy gets the best education in the world, graduates from any university he chooses, and still has enough money to help 1,000 other families like yours? You're impossible, Miguel laughed. I learned from the best, a 12-year-old boy who broke into a hospital, defied security guards, faced down a psychopathic billionaire, and saved not just one life, but thousands of lives. The lesson from that impossible story was simple but profound. The greatest power doesn't come from bank accounts or famous surnames. It comes from having enough courage to do what's right when everyone tells you you're too small, too young, too poor to make a difference. Victoria Hastings had $8 billion and lost it all because she believed money made her untouchable. Miguel Rodriguez had nothing and gained everything because he believed that a life matters more than any fortune. And Richard Hastings, who has had both worlds, learned in the most painful way possible that you can have all the zeros you want in your bank account, but without humanity, without real connections, without greater purpose than accumulating wealth, you are the poorest of beggars. Sometimes a miracle is not about impossible cures or divine interventions. It's about a street boy who refuses to accept that justice is a privilege only for those who can pay for it. It's about a billionaire who chooses to betray his own family to protect thousands of strangers. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices simply because they're the right ones. And if you're reading this story thinking, that would never happen in real life, remember, it happens every day. In courtrooms, in hospitals, in offices, in streets. Ordinary people facing giants, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes giants fall. Not because they are defeated by brute force, but because they underestimated the power of someone who has nothing to lose except the truth. And the truth, when placed in the right hands, is the most powerful weapon there is. If this story of courage, justice, and redemption touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, because as long as there are people willing to fight for what's right, no matter how small the world considers them, there will always be hope that the next miracle could be happening right now, somewhere no one is paying attention. And maybe, just maybe, this next miracle starts with you.